So why don't you walk us back to when you were creating Wounded Warrior Project? How did you get connected with Stephen Nardisi and Al Giordano?
Yeah. Well, I met Steve and Al probably back in 97, 98 time frame. Al and I were working for Disabled American Veterans. It was my first job, a real job out of the Marine Corps. And DAV had a National Service Officer training program in Denver, Colorado. It was 4 months long, and they taught us to be essentially attorneys in fact for veterans' disability cases, and Al was one of my trainers, and really was an exceptional service officer himself. This is prior to him going to law school, but he had a talent for representing veterans. And then I met Steve about 2 years later, almost in the same capacity. I was doing some training, Steve was the trainer. You know, Steve had been a pro bono advocate for veterans during law school and went to work for an organization at that time called Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, which later became United Spinal. We struck up a friendship, and we were colleagues as well, and I respected the work that they did. So
did you connect Steve and Al then? Did they know each other through you?
Al went to work later for EPVA, right before he was about to go to law school.
Okay.
And so the three of us came back together again. And when I started to churn up the idea about Wounded Warrior Project, Steve and Al were certainly involved in the kind of second phase of the founding of the project. It really, of course, started with Jim and my dad and I, and you know, of course, you know, Julie.
What was your vision when you founded it?
Well, the vision is the same then as it is today, to help to foster the most successful, well-adjusted generation of disabled veterans in our country's history. We had an opportunity to do it differently. The veterans of Vietnam were treated so poorly when they came back to this country, and their message was delivered so poorly. And I knew that there was going to be immediate needs from my own experience that many organizations were not equipped to handle at that time. Also, there was a huge difference in age between the Vietnam vet and the veteran that was returning home. And so what I was trying to do was get a younger generation of veterans helping a younger generation of veterans so that they could come together and that they would have some common experience. And so that's the initial vision. That's why we started the project. And I will tell you that I never expected it to be as big as it is today. I don't know that I wanted it to be as big as it is today. As a matter of fact, with what's going on today, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it grew too fast. And it became exactly what we didn't want it to become. When we started, we did not want to be one of the old guard veteran service organizations. We did not want to have a massive fundraising plan. We certainly wanted to raise enough money to do what we had to do, because frankly, you have to raise money. If there's no money, there's no program. If there's no program, there's no money. So, but there is a standard of reasonableness. And what's happened over the course of the last 5 or 6 years is that they have crossed the line of reasonableness. And frankly, they got caught.
Do you regret bringing Stephen Nardisi and Al Giordano on to the Wounded Warrior Project?
You know, in hindsight, of course. But they did good work. They did good work for a long time. But organizations need a conscience. And I think that my tenure at Wounded Warrior Project, while I was there, I was the conscience of the organization. For instance, I said I'd never make more than $199,000 a year in that job. That was met with a lot of concern and frustration by the people who were working with me.
Because they wanted to make more money?
Of course. I mean, if the organization got to it where it was today and your CEO has put a cap on his salary, all boats don't rise. And so that was the beginning, I think, of some of the difficulties that we were having. Also, I was starting to acquire talent from outside of our network. outside of people that we had worked with in the past. And I think that was viewed as a threat to them. And there were people that I had served with in the military, for instance, who I brought in to run our policy and legislative department in Washington. And essentially they said, this guy's not one of us.
Is that Steve and Al?
Steve and Al, Bruce Nitchie, some of the other directors in the organization, members of the board of directors, they said these guys aren't you know, long-term veteran advocates. And I said, that's not what we need right now. The person that I brought in, Colonel Brian Fesser, was a combat veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a leader, and we needed leadership in Washington. We didn't need another one of us.
Did you get a sense that they kind of wanted a good old boys club, a circle of trust of people to be like-minded like them, that they felt like they could trust?
I think so. I think there was a sense that there was an inner circle that was created, and I heard that over and over again from people who've called me this week and you know, after this story broke, that it was almost like you could not pierce that group of people, that they were so tight that nothing came into the circle or out of the circle. And if you were someone who raised an issue or concern that dealt with that group specifically, that there was going to be retribution involved.
Were you surprised to hear of this culture of intimidation and fear that fostered after you left?
Well, I've known about it since probably 2012. I knew about the excess salaries since 2011. I mean, there was huge increases year over year when I left. Unreasonable increases year over year after I left, and unreasonable bonuses.
Was it greed, do you think?
I think that they believed a theory that your salary should be tied directly to how much money you raise and the success of fundraising. And I agree that you need to have good people, and good people need to be compensated effectively. But there is a standard of reasonableness. And I also think that the veterans charity world is different. You know, for certain organizations, it requires spending more money to get somebody good. For the Wounded Warrior Project, it didn't require that. There were plenty of people in this country who would have served that organization at a lot less money than $475,000 a year and done just as an effective job. You know, I think there was this sense that they were untouchable. You know, if you look at the things that they donated to, for example, Wounded Warrior Project made a $150,000 donation to the Charity Defense Council. The Charity Defense Council is run by a guy named Dan Pilata. And what Dan does is he advocates for fundraising costs to be increased because it will help missions. He also, you know, believes in professional fundraisers, which I do as well. I believe that organizations can, and in some cases should, hire professional fundraisers, especially organizations that are growing. It's a profession. But what I think they tried to do was hide behind this dialogue that it was okay, that, you know, we will be better as a whole, as a nonprofit sector, if, you know, we attract Google and Facebook type talent. I don't know that that's not necessarily, that's true. And I think what we saw was that attitude run riot at Wounded Warrior Project. Wounded Warrior Project is not Facebook or Google. You know, $250,000 a year in snacks in the break room, it's just not right. You know, men and women who are on fixed incomes in this country do not want to see their donor dollars going to snacks in the break room. They don't want to see their donor dollars going to lavish retreats. You know, if you're working for Wounded Warrior Project, and this is a direct message to the employees, If you're working for Wounded Warrior Project and you need a retreat and a training in the Broadmoor in Colorado, you're in the wrong profession. You know, you need to go to work at Google. You need to go into the private sector. But you don't need that. And what I am really angry about is that there were 14 executive vice presidents in that company and a board of 6 who did not see that as wrong. You know, there's this word that's being used in New York public relations agencies called optics. And Wounded Warrior Project has hid behind, you know, we understand that the optics may have been bad. This was wrong. You know, there's burglary and there's robbery, okay? One is worse than the other, but they're both wrong. And in this case, Wounded Warrior Project was wrong. And what upsets me is that they won't admit it, that they won't listen to the anger of the donors, and more specifically to the veterans that we serve. They are tone deaf. It's an echo chamber. And they're not, there is a crisis of conscience inside the Wounded Warrior Project right now.
So, were you surprised after you left in 2009 what the Wounded Warrior Project grew into?
I was. Frankly, I was surprised. I did not think that you would see that type of hubris. It was nothing more than hubris. It became a marketing and fundraising machine, and they started to read their own press and believe it.
Do you feel like, as a charity, they should answer to the public? I mean, as part of this Charity Defense Council, their message is, you know, they will combat negative news reports, and they will only talk about their impact and not have to talk about their overhead.
Right.
Is that fair to the public that funds these charities, specifically Wounded Warrior Project?
This is a public charity, a 501c3 organization. What I'm also offended by is the idea that Wounded Warrior Project thinks they own Wounded Warrior Project. They don't own it. Not one person in that organization has ever made a financial investment. There are no stockholders at Wounded Warrior Project. The only stockholders are the veterans we serve and the donors who believe in the mission. They've lost sight of that.
Were you there when any of these lawsuits were being brought against other veteran service organizations or fellow veterans?
Yeah, we brought a lawsuit when I was there. Both of those lawsuits involved infringement on the Wounded Warrior Project brand. In one case, and this has been proven in federal court, we were doing a TV spot in New York City on Fox, and this particular organization, which had a very similar Wounded Warrior website URL, actually parked a van that was logoed with that URL right next to the shot. That caused, we received hundreds of thousands of dollars from that particular spot. It was a major national Fox News spot. We sued that organization because we believed that they were, well, we knew that they were intentionally doing that to try to bleed off funds that were put there for the Wounded Warrior Project to use. And
did you feel good about that?
No, I felt terrible about it. I absolutely, we tried at every level to settle, and this particular person continued to do that. And the only thing that we could do was sue him because, frankly, we have a responsibility to the donors. They intended for that donation to be made in one place, and it was being made somewhere else.
So it's interesting you say that, because that is often the PR line that's getting disseminated on social media that we can read to other donors or fellow veterans asking why they're suing or threatening to sue that many more veteran service organizations or these two wounded warriors, injured veterans, I should say. And I say that because I've talked to people and they say once you're out, it's offensive to be called a wounded warrior because they had such a bad experience. They want to be called injured veterans. Anywho, suing these two injured vets who used to work for Wounded Warrior Project. I mean, people are upset that donor dollars are being spent on lawsuits and potentially ruining the lives of these two people or those that run these other charities. I mean,
Right.
are you surprised at how much the litigation has grown and they're using that kind of same lingo you just used?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that if somebody was, and this has happened, you know, I don't have much defense for what Wounded Warrior Project has done in a lot of different areas, but in this one area, if somebody set up a similar page as Facebook and tried to drive traffic to that other page, they were injuring the organization the same way that this organization that was trying to drive traffic on a Wounded Warrior Project media shot, multiple media shots, it was deceiving the donors, which is very much the same thing that's been happening there. Of course, I hate that donor money had to be spent to defend that, but if that continued, the organization was going to lose more donor dollars. Now, when it comes to individuals, let me say this. I have a real problem with Wounded Warrior Project suing individuals. We put together a 10-point plan, my brother Jim and I, to restore trust in the Wounded Warrior Project. One of the things that we did was we asked that all non-disparagement clauses be ripped up immediately inside a Wounded Warrior Project, and that people be allowed to talk. There's a culture of intimidation in the organization, and they were using those non-disparagement clauses as a weapon. And as a matter of fact, it was reported here widely in Jacksonville that nobody had heard from me in 4 years. Well, the reason they hadn't heard from me is because I signed a non-disparagement agreement. And Wounded Warrior Project had become litigious. And I am not independently wealthy, and I did not want to defend myself against that. And also, I did not want to hurt the organization. I still believe in the mission. I love the employees of that organization. Many of them are my friends. I am the godfather to Carly Nevins, Dan Nevins' daughter, who's a famous veteran in this town and a famous veteran around the country. I married, I performed the weddings for the employees of that organization. They were and are my family.
So then how did you leave in 2009? What happened?
Well, we had differing management philosophies. Of course, we talked about the salary issue, but there was a desire of the organization to move into direct response fundraising, TV, which I was vehemently opposed to. I felt as though, and when the fundraising consultants came to us, they actually used the ASPCA as an example of the success of DRTV. And I was immediately offended. Veterans are not victims. Veterans are volunteers. And to be viewed as victims is deplorable. And the way those ads have come out, there are some good ones, but for the most part, you know, you see a crying wife, and I feel terrible for them. And I feel terrible for the veterans who I feel have been victimized. And I will tell you that the military community has been absolutely horrified by the effect of that. I heard from a senior Pentagon official last week that they discussed at the highest level the Wounded Warrior Project ads because they were concerned that they were a problem for recruiting. That has become a national defense issue, that people who are seeing those ads are discouraging their children from joining the military because they don't believe that this country will take care of its veterans. That's the wrong message when you're donating, when you're trying to get money donated to an organization. Wounded Warrior Project needs to look at its responsibilities. And the other thing that's very important about this is when I left, we were raising about $28 million in cash. We're a $50 million organization with in-kind gifts and all those kind of things. We were having trouble effectively spending that money and keeping our fundraising to program ratios in line because we were growing so quickly. And the last thing that I wanted to have happen was for us to raise $100 million overnight. How in the world were we going to keep up with that? And what's become even more offensive, Lynnsey, back then I had $7 million in the bank. You've got to spend that money very, very quickly. The charity rating agencies require you to spend that money within a certain period of time. And Wounded Warrior Project has hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank right now. They show it on their IRS Form 990. And I've heard it called a rainy day fund for Wounded Warrior Project. Well, we've got 25 veteran suicides a day. It's raining right now, and I don't understand it.
I've heard the same references about that. So I think people are really curious. So you had, back in 2009, you had a disagreement over the vision for the future,
Right.
with fundraising and the Wounded Warrior Project, or I guess brand, moving forward. But how did you leave?
So I left for the good of the order. I did not want to cause a huge ruckus both inside the organization and outside the organization. I did not want there to be a crisis of confidence, that something was deeply wrong inside of the Wounded Warrior Project.
At this point, were you sparring with Stephen Al?
I thought that our relationship was better than it actually was. However, in the weeks prior, I had considered letting Al, Steve, and Bruce Nitschke go. And as a matter of fact, in a dinner right around the time I left, I sat down with Bruce Nitschke and we talked, and he said, "I'm really surprised that you haven't fired me." Because it was insubordination what they were doing. And look, I'm not, you know, I was the CEO of the company, but I was a leader. And it was insubordination. But I loved the organization. I love what it stands for. I loved the people inside the organization. And I had a responsibility to the donors and the Wounded Warriors. And if there was going to be a battle, I was the one to go, because I was tired as well. You know, what people don't understand is I traveled more than 200 days a year for almost 7 years, spreading the message of Wounded Warrior Project. And I had 2 young children at home and a wife, and Wounded Warrior Project had become my mistress. And I wanted to spend some time with my family. And so I felt as though I could make it in the private sector. I started a campaign here in Florida to run against Mike Weinstein for the House of Representatives in Florida. I had things that I wanted to do, and I did them.
Do you feel like you're ready to go back and lead now?
I do. I think, frankly, I am the only person right now in this country that can restore the trust of this organization with the veterans and the donors. And there's been nothing more than a movement from both Wounded Warriors and supporters and donors to bring me back as the CEO. If you had asked me Thursday morning, before the CBS News special report came out, announcing the termination of Al and Steve, would you go back as the CEO of Wounded Warrior Project? And people had asked me that because the scandal had already started. I said, no way. But there was something about seeing their faces come up in preempted programming that vindicated me. I felt vindicated. And there was this 20-pound weight that I had been carrying around that was immediately lifted. And I was overwhelmed. Not only was I overwhelmed personally, but I was overwhelmed and humbled by the immediate response of people who I know and love, who are Wounded Warriors themselves, who I started the organization with, who immediately started to call and text me and say, you have to go back. If the organization is going to survive, it needs its conscience, it needs its soul back.
Are you angry with Stephen Al?
I'm certainly disappointed. I considered them friends. I've gotten well past anger. And it's really time to move on from Stephen Al.
Okay, well, were you angry with Stephen Al? Would you say they essentially pushed you out back in 2009?
Oh, there's no question they pushed me out. And it became very evident in 2010. I took essentially a consulting position with the organization for 1 year to provide stability so that people would think that there wasn't necessarily, any big thing going on. So I went around the country a little bit and I spoke on behalf of the organization. But as soon as that contract was over, there was an overt attempt to completely wipe my name and my family's name out of Wounded Warrior Project. No, it's okay.
Was that hurtful?
It was extremely hurtful. I mean, the Wounded Warrior Project is not about me. It's not about my family. But the truth was not being told. One of the things that is so important about the way the Wounded Warrior Project was founded, it was founded with $50 in a Network Solutions website in the basement of my house in Roanoke, Virginia. What it should say is that anybody who feels passionate and deeply committed to something can make a difference in the world. The old saying that, one person can change the world is true. And for that story to go away was hurtful to the organization, and it was hurtful to the warriors who were part of that. Today it says something like friends and, fellow veterans started an organization which has become the Wounded Warrior Project. And frankly, there are members of the board of directors or employees who have come to me before and after and said this was an overt effort on behalf of the organization to scrub the Melia name from the history of Wounded Warrior Project.
Do you trust the board of directors now?
Let me say this. Tony Odierno is a gentleman. He is a hero of our country, and I hope this makes it. The board of directors are all volunteers. Do I trust each man individually? Of course I do. They are good, noble men. Many of them are veterans. Many of them are heroes. What I don't trust is the way they've been performing their fiduciary responsibility to the organization. They allowed their number to dwindle to 6 with an organization of that size. 6.
Well, it seems odd there's 14 EVPs, but 6 board members.
Well, exactly. That's my biggest concern. And I was in business. I was in the oil business in Texas, and the oil business isn't doing too well right now. So my head was down. I didn't even know who was on the board of directors of Wounded Warrior Project. And when the scandal broke 6 weeks ago, I actually had to go onto the website to see who was actually on the board. And I was shocked by the number. It was amazing. I spoke to somebody directly related to the board, and I said, how come they allowed the number to get to 6? And they said, well, Gordon Mansfield died, and then Kevin Delaney died. And I said, well, Gordon Mansfield died almost 5 years ago, and Kevin Delaney died a year ago at least. They couldn't have replaced them quickly. There were probably thousands of people, senior people, qualified people who would have been willing to serve on that board. What they did is they consolidated power in the executive office of the Wounded Warrior Project. They got 14 executive directors. There are divisions of Procter & Gamble that do not have 14 executive vice presidents. There's no reason for it. This is not, we're not putting together a moonshot at Wounded Warrior Project. There's no R&D involved. There's no major innovation projects at Wounded Warrior Project. It's not, in some cases, it's a layup. We're trying to raise money for wounded vets. Is it involved? Sure, it's involved. Is it tough? Yes. Does it require a certain level of commitment? Of course. But again, it's not rocket science. And to have 14 executive vice presidents it isn't just wrong, it looks bad. And all of those executive vice presidents made very good 6-figure salaries. And the public is offended by that, and they should be.
We did a story about Adam Silva, who had taken to Facebook. I'm not sure if you worked with him personally before.
I did. I hired Adam.
Okay. What were your thoughts on his responses on social media to the reports and the investigation?
Well, I made 3 very bad hires. I would count Adam Silva at the top of that list. I was offended, as were all of our donors.
What do you make of Jonathan Sullivan's emails that we obtained that he wrote to staff in the weeks that the investigation was ongoing. And even the day after Steve and Al were fired, telling his department to do like Steve and Al would want them to do.
Yeah. Well, when Julie, my former wife, was working in the organization, one of the things that she was very concerned about was a T-shirt that was printed back in 2010 after my departure that said, "I drank the Kool-Aid." And it was a T-shirt that was used to promote the culture in the organization. Well, sir, it was offensive. You know, Jim Jones killed a bunch of people with the Kool-Aid, and there were a lot of employees there who knew what "I drank the Kool-Aid" was all about back in the 70s and 80s. And they made it very clear that they didn't like that. I can tell you this, the executive team at Wounded Warrior Project has drank the Kool-Aid, and they are not responding to this properly. There is justifiable anger in the community, justifiable anger, and they're tone deaf. There is an echo chamber inside that organization, and you know, they are not being served well by their internal PR department. Isla Tezel is doing a terrible job. They hired a firm to do the crisis management. I read an article here recently that said by a senior, I think you may have interviewed him, that said that it will be studied in months and years to come, the response that Wounded Warrior Project has had to this crisis and how poorly it was done. Business schools all over the country will study it. The only thing that I can relate it to was the early days of the BP spill, where you had the CEO coming on TV and saying, "But you don't understand." That's really all they've done. They just have said, you know, "We understand that you don't like this, but you don't understand all we've done." You know, if you get into a dispute with somebody, if you hurt them, it is never wrong to say, "I'm sorry." It's a starting point for healing and moving forward. And to date, I haven't heard anybody in that organization say, "I'm sorry." I'm sorry to the wounded veterans. I'm sorry to the donors. All I've heard them say is, "You don't understand. We haven't done anything wrong."
I've been on the receiving end of some of that combative communication from the Wounded Warrior Project, just for simply asking questions. And we've also, you know, spoken with people who are upset with us for doing the stories in the first place because they've been very happy with the Wounded Warrior Project. They provided help. You know, we are the only media organization who has not reported any numbers incorrectly that the board is hammering home on. We did not ever report those numbers, and we were the only ones to ever go and get a warrior to speak positively about the organization, because there's no denying the Wounded Warrior Project has done a lot of good. But we received calls and conversations we've had with people that work within the organization that are upset with us for doing the story. But also the way I obtained the emails was someone still within the organization that says, "Look at how," I mean, the word she used was a cult. This cult-like mentality still exists. Do you agree that there's like a disparity amongst the people who work there? Some that are, I guess for the phrase that Steve would use, on the bus,
Yeah.
and others that kind of are outsiders saying this isn't right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like two schools of thought going on within the project?
Well, I think when you've got a culture of intimidation, people inside the organization they're in two different camps. They believe their own press, or they're too afraid to say something. So it's hard to get any good information out of the Wounded Warrior Project. Has the Wounded Warrior Project done amazing things? Since its first day, it's done amazing things. Have thousands of wounded veterans been helped? No question about it. That's why it's so important that we save this organization. That's why it's so important that we fix this crisis of confidence and that we restore trust. We've put a Facebook page out that's called Restore Trust, and it's up to about 1,000 people that are visited that page, and that's just the likes that have come on and have said, we love your plan. We love your 10-point plan to restore trust in the organization. We believe that John is the right guy to return as the CEO. I have received hundreds of texts and phone calls and emails of support to come back to the organization. And, the only people that don't want me to come back to the organization are the people inside the Wounded Warrior Project who are threatened by me coming back.
Would those be the executive vice presidents you speak of?
Absolutely. They are scared to death because one of the things that we said was that we would stop these bonuses. Well, of course, if you're there for the right reasons, you're not real concerned about your bonus. We've heard it from the inside that they're very, very concerned that I would stop the bonus.
And I understand all the employees qualify for bonuses.
Right. I think bonus is a terrible word. I think that people do deserve raises if they've done a good job. I mean, this is an organization. It has employees, and employees deserve to be compensated for success on the job. Every year the cost of living's not getting any better.
So have you had positive conversations with Anthony Odierno since you publicly announced that you are interested in coming back?
Tony got in touch with me about 24 hours after the news of me wanting to return as CEO came out. And, the AP reported a story that was relatively accurate. I was getting on an airplane. I was literally sitting on an airplane talking to the AP when we issued a statement as a family because we felt we needed to when this came out. When the AP reporter called me, he said, "Would you be willing to return to help?" And I said, I'd be open to return. We've asked the board if they'd like to discuss. Would you be open to lead in some capacity? And I said I'd be open to lead. And the AP story came out as Wounded Warrior Project founder open to return to lead the organization. There are people in my family, my own father who you've spoken to, who were concerned about that. About me returning to WWP and made it very clear, not because they didn't think that I could do the job, but it was going to be a tough slog to return the reputation of this organization. And there's a lot of people that have said, why would you want to do that? You've got a good career, you've made a good career for yourself since you left, you're currently employed, why would you want to go back to that and try to fix that? But anybody who knows me knows that, when you do something like that in your life, you don't want to see it go away. You want it to remain what it was, which is, the preeminent veterans organization in the country.
Well, and it's so important for our veterans to have access to these services and for donor dollars to be spent responsibly 100% of the time in order to get these veterans the help. Because we've heard from plenty of veterans who say they aren't able to get help. Right. Do you feel like you're the right man to return as CEO?
I do. Look, I am not, you can't do this alone. I had great employees when I was at Wounded Warrior Project the first time. The organization makes hundreds of millions of dollars today. It's a different organization than it was the day that I left. It's got a couple more zeros on the balance sheet. But the organization needs a soul and a conscience today. I can hire a senior executive in the organization who can manage, parts of the day-to-day operation. But this organization needs a leader.
Would you be willing to come on in another capacity if the board felt like someone else needed to be CEO?
I don't know. But I will tell you that I have offered to do it for free for 6 months.
And you've told Tony Odierno?
I have.
So how many conversations have you had with him, and do you have a meeting set up with him?
Jim has spoken with him once. He had the initial call. Jim is my brother. I've spoken with Tony twice. We've opened a line of communications. The one thing that we have asked Tony for, and it will be totally unacceptable to us if we do not get it, we have asked for a formal apology to our family for the way that we've been treated. The way we've been treated is deplorable. So we asked Tony, we sent him a copy of an email that we want to be sent to the staff of the Wounded Warrior Project, apologizing to our family for the way that we've been treated, saying that no longer should Wounded Warrior Project employees, some of them, my family, like I mentioned before, feel intimidated to meet and talk to me and socialize with me and my family, and then to return our emails. That would be a terrific gesture to open up our email accounts. We all had email accounts at one point in time, and then also to quit blocking us from social media. Our entire family has been blocked from social media. And I have one other thing that I want to say. Several months ago, my daughter Miranda, who's a college student, needed to get some paperwork done and called R.J. Mead, who was a longtime employee. He was employee number 3 of the Wounded Warrior Project. And he was actually just terminated not too long ago. R.J. is a guy who I would say was responsible for probably tens of veterans not committing suicide. He's one of the best, most compassionate service people I've ever seen. And I believe they've left a wounded warrior behind when they left RJ behind. But that's another story. Miranda went into that office for service, and it got back to the Wounded Warrior headquarters that John Melia had been in to get service. RJ Mead was called in to the headquarters here in Jacksonville by Al Giordano, and he said, I heard you suggested John Melia go to the office in San Diego, and we don't help that family. This is my daughter. If Al Giordano's son, Christian, had broken down last night here in Jacksonville and he needed somebody to come out and help him, I'd go out there.
Was she trying to get a job there, or she?
No, she was trying to get her claim for benefits taken care of. You don't need to hold my daughter responsible for a dispute between the parents.
So have you spoken directly with Steve or Al since you left in 2010?
I have not had one conversation with Steve or Al.
And even after all this has transpired with them losing their jobs, would you be interested in speaking to them?
No, no. I have no interest in speaking to them. I have nothing to say. I've said everything I want to say here.
Do you feel like getting rid of both of them was the right move for the organization?
There's no question it was the right move, but they've got more to do.
Do you feel like the public can have their trust restored in the Wounded Warrior Project?
Not right now. Not with the way they're behaving. Like I said, they need to apologize. They need to come clean. They need to be plain spoken. They need to quit hiding behind a New York public relations firm. We are veterans. We wanted to be spoken to directly. Leadership requires that leaders come out and they calm fears, and they lead from the front. And there's a crisis of leadership inside the Wounded Warrior Project right now.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Can I say I want to speak directly to the board of directors, to the employees of the Wounded Warrior Project, and our donors?
Sure.
Okay. I want to speak directly to the veterans that the Wounded Warrior Project serves. I want to talk directly to the employers, and I want to talk to the donors. And if the Wounded Warrior Project is unwilling to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that the organization that we founded, that you work for, that you believe in, that you contributed to, that serves you, has become what it's become. I'm hurt by it, as you are. But I can tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that if I return to the Wounded Warrior Project, we will restore your trust in this organization. We will ensure that, first and foremost, that our wounded warriors are served. We will honor our fiduciary responsibilities to our donors and to the families that the Wounded Warrior Project serves, and to the American people, because it's too important. We have other veteran service organizations who need the help of the Wounded Warrior Project. We have a lot of resources, and we need to distribute those resources to organizations that are doing good work. Many of those organizations today are in fear of what's going on at Wounded Warrior Project. I talked to an organization this week, a senior leader of a major military organization, who is expecting a grant from Wounded Warrior Project. He's not sure that he's going to be able to make payroll. It's a significant grant to operate, and he's not sure he's going to be able to make payroll. That's a travesty. And again, that's a crisis of confidence that can be stopped right now.
The only thing is, you said employers, did you mean employees?
I did. Do you want me to do it again?
If you would like to.
Just that first part? Can you cut it in?
Sure, or you can just do the whole thing again, however you.
I don't really want to do the whole thing again, okay? I want to speak directly to the wounded warriors that the organization serves, to our donors, to our employees, and to the American people. I want to tell you, I'm sorry. If the organization is unwilling to do it, I'm going to tell you that I'm sorry. I take some responsibility for hiring the individuals that you know, perpetrated lavish spending inside the organization. I take personal responsibility for some of that, and I'm sorry personally. And I would hope that the organization could be big enough to come out and say that they're sorry too, and start a place, you know, start from a place that we all can heal. And so I think that's a first step. This may not work out for me, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. But the public needs to know what happened there so it doesn't happen again, not just at Wounded Warrior Project, but anywhere. There's a Time magazine article out this morning that talks about how this has direct impact on the entire nonprofit sector. People do not trust nonprofits right now around this country because of what Wounded Warrior Project did. There is a sense of suspicion that's been created, and that can stop.
Anything else you would like to add?
No.